When Black Panther dropped, people called Wakanda a fantasy, a dream. And here's the twist. Coogler didn't invent the idea of black power as institutions. He just gave it a budget. In Black Panther, power is not just about a hero. It's about infrastructure. Wakanda works because its institutions work. They have a government and a military. They're basically leaders in technology and have a booming economy that supports their people. The branches all operate together to make Wakanda a completely self-sufficient black nation. It shows black sovereignty is organized and functional. Even Wakanda's secrecy is a national strategy.
In Sinners, Coogler shifts tone and the focus becomes darker and more socially intimate. Rather than dramatizing whether a community exists, Sinners interrogates how a community endures in the face of internal contradictions and external threat. The tension is not simply supernatural or spiritual, it is institutional. The most important moments are not about what the characters believe, but about what the community demands from the individual in the name of survival. Coogler's larger point becomes clearer here. Power is not exercised through isolated acts, but through systems that can protect a community.
And to be clear, the point is not that Coogler and this earlier figure we're about to introduce are the same. The point is that Coogler gives modern audiences a visual language for something that existed many years I say, prior to Hollywood ever allowing it on screen. You know what that is?
What's that?
Black institutions as a form of power.
Wow. Well, long before Coogler put those ideas on screen, a black preacher in Oklahoma was filming communities built on that same logic. Not fictional kingdoms or cinematic dramas, but real towns. His name was Reverend Solomon Sir Jones. What he recorded in the 1920s complicates how we think about American film.
Early American film history is usually told through the lens of white Hollywood's rise in the distribution networks and language of studios, while black filmmaking and black exhibition circuits were treated as marginal or non-existent. Hollywood was still figuring out whose stories mattered. Many films reduced people, especially black people, to stereotypes, background figures, or plot devices. The camera was a tool of control, shaping narratives that fit the studio's vision rather than reflecting lived realities. Reverend Solomon Sir Jones turned that world upside down.
Born on August 20th, 1869 in Mason, Tennessee, Solomon Sir Jones received his early education at Howell Baptist Institute. At the age of 20, he volunteered as a missionary with the American Baptist Home Missionary Society, which led him to the Oklahoma Territory. Arriving in Guthrie during the historic Oklahoma Land Run, Jones dedicated the following decades to building and strengthening black institutions.
In 1924, Reverend Jones was one of 4 religious leaders voted to travel to Europe and the Middle East in a contest run by the Madam C.J. Walker Company. Before departing on the 3-month trip in early 1925, Jones purchased a Bell & Howell Filmo movie camera, one of the first cameras to use small gauge 16mm film. Upon his return to the U.S., he began documenting scenes from the Madam C.J. Walker Company. Jones's films show the Southwest headquarters in Oklahoma and serve as early visual records of black entrepreneurship and community growth. He also began systematically recording life across black towns. His camera moved through every layer of community life. It documented worship services, which not only anchored spiritual and social order, but also functioned as central organizing spaces within black communities. Sporting events appear as structured recreational activities, reflecting camaraderie and fun. Footage of schools provides evidence of formal education systems and the prioritization of literacy, discipline, and youth development. Parades are shown as public civic expressions, demonstrating organized participation in shared rituals and local identity. Masonic, fraternal, and organizational gatherings are captured, indicating networks of leadership, mutual aid, and structured governance.
And he was not documenting from a distance. He was filming spaces he helped build. And that distinction matters because his camera was not extracting images, but rather giving context to those he filmed. He was essentially filming document a people's capacity, proving that Black life was organized and self-governing.
Now, the archive he left behind totals roughly, about 55 minutes
right.
across, 29 reels?
Right.
This footage that he had basically indicated networks of leadership, mutual aid, and structured governance. Black-owned businesses even illustrate patterns of entrepreneurship and internal commerce. He had all of this on film, and he captured it in real time. They had their own banks even. They had telephone companies in this time period and in those communities that he was filming. And some of the residents, now watch this, they even had oil wells.
How about that? Oil wells. Can you imagine?
that?
The amount
How
of
rich
wealth.
did they have to be?
Exactly, the wealth, right. And this is where the comparison to Black Panther becomes even more useful. Because Wakanda felt powerful because it was organized, it was structured. And Jones's footage reveals that many Black towns in the early 20th century were also just as structured. In Oklahoma alone, more than 50 all-Black towns were established. Jones filmed places such as Boley, Taft, Clearview, Langston, Renningsville, and others. These towns developed governance, economic networks, educational systems, all within the larger system of segregation. None of these towns, of course, were perfect or utopias, because many of them were economically constrained, obviously, by white-controlled markets and state power, right?
But that's exactly the point. They still thrive, even under constraint. They built functioning institutions. The comparison to Sinner sharpens the tension, right? Coogler's darker work emphasizes that community survival requires discipline and cohesion under pressure.
Right.
Jones's films exist in the same atmosphere. In 1921, the Tulsa Race Massacre destroyed the Greenwood district. Across the country, Black communities face violence, sabotage, and constant political threat. Jones did not center destruction in his films. Even with all that going on, he didn't choose to focus his lens on the destruction that occurred. He recorded what existed before and beyond it.
Right.
By filming infrastructure rather than catastrophe, he preserved evidence of stability that violence attempted to erase. In a century where Black history is often remembered only through trauma, his archive insists on something else. Proof of normal governance, normal joy, and normal order.
Yeah, that's where that concept of Black joy comes in, that resilience that we have as a people, and that's a beautiful thing.
That is.
And I also want to point out at this point too, one of the most striking elements I think of his footage is the way he captures the subjects looking directly into the lens. Their gaze is steady, and it's got a slowness and an unhurriedness about it. And whereas early Hollywood often used Black bodies, as we stated before, as background, labor, comic relief, and those grotesque caricatures that we talk about. But Jones's subjects meet the camera fully as citizens. They appear aware and composed with dignity. And these long, steady gazes, they challenge the usual way that we watch film, because as a viewer, you're no longer just looking at the people on the screen. The people on the screen are looking back at us, right? And the viewer is not positioned as superior. That subtle reversal changes the power dynamic between the viewer and the subject. And this aligns more closely to Coogler's emphasis on interiority and dignity than with the early studio portrayals of Black characters.
Now, the distribution model also matters. Coogler works within a global system capable of reaching millions. Jones screened his films in churches and community spaces.
Yeah.
His audience was local, but the underlying principle was similar. Control the narrative space. That's what he did. He didn't just make films outside the studio system. He exhibited outside the studio system. Also, that matters because distribution is power. He didn't wait for validation from dominant institutions. He built his own circuit.
Yeah, there you go. And this also helps explain why Jones is not widely known. You know, film history tends to follow money and distribution, right?
Yeah.
And what was not marketed nationally often gets, treated like it didn't even exist.
Right.
Archives will fade. Those old reels, they'll start to deteriorate. And, those community circuits or local markets, they disappear and they change. Right?
Yeah.
And the story that survives often becomes the story of the mainstream. But Jones, the discovery of Jones's work, it disrupts this story.
Yeah.
His work proves that Black cinema was not only reacting to Hollywood, it was building its own record of Black modern life from within.
Framing Jones through Coogler's films clarifies his significance. Black Panther visualizes Black sovereignty at blockbuster scale. Sinners explores the moral weight of protecting a community under threat. Jones documented both elements in real life. He filmed economic independence and religious structure. He filmed leisure and discipline, as well as celebrations and fraternal orders. His archive demonstrates that Black institutional life did not begin how Hollywood imagined it. It was already functioning.
Right. And this modern media environment makes this legacy even more relevant. Today, digital platforms allow creators to document community life instantly. But algorithms reward intensity and spectacle. Content that shocks travels farther than content that documents routine structure,
Right.
And Jones filmed routine structure. There's no doubt about that. He recorded what appeared ordinary because he understood that ordinary institutions are what sustain communities, right?
Correct.
And they actually end up being extraordinary in a way, right?
Absolutely.
And his archive is kind of the opposite of today's viral economy. It's slow, communal, institution-centered, and that is exactly why it matters so much.
So, reframed this way, Solomon Sir Jones expands film history. He shows that early cinema was not only a tool of stereotype and mass entertainment, it was also a method of preservation used by local leaders to protect memory. Long before blockbuster films centered Black governance or dramatized Black survival, Jones documented both. His work raises a question that remains urgent. Who controls the image, and what happens when Black communities record themselves before anyone else can define who we are? Thanks for joining us and staying to the end. And as a treat for doing that, we leave you with this extra footage captured by Jones. Enjoy, and until next time, peace and love.